And we are rolling on with our Rowdy.com, SeenDaily.com look at this year's top 20, the 2011 top 20 from the preseason edition of NASCAR Illustrated. My name is Bass Masters from Rowdy.com, sitting alongside Kenny Bruce of SeenDaily.com. And Kenny, we're up to Kevin Harvck, number 5 in the countdown. This guy was the most consistent guy over 36 races last year. He's only 5th on the list here. Is that appropriate for Kevin?
Well, I mean, I would rank him a little bit higher than that, but when you poll everybody and put them together, 5th is about where people feel like he's going to run. He had an exceptional year last year. One of the knocks against Kevin has been you have a good season followed by a season that's not so good. But, at the same time, the last 5 years, he's only finished outside the top 10, I think, 1 time. So he's had 4 finishes of 10th or better in the points. So, I mean, the guy definitely deserves to be one of the ones that are being considered. What does he have to do to kind of bump himself up to championship level? I mean, if you look at his chase last year, he only had 1 finish outside the top 10, but no wins. Yeah, I mean, other than the Dover, he finished 15th.
I think so, 14, 15.
Yeah, 14th or 15th. I mean, he had 8th or better in the other chase races. The knock on him early was they were really good on the plate tracks, but they struggled when they went everywhere else. Struggling being relative. I mean, they had top 15 runs, top 10 runs, but they weren't contending for wins at the other places, and I think that's something that Kevin and that team really need to do this year to prove that they can move up to the number 1 spot. Yeah, it seems as though he's got the part of the equation figured out, which is limit your downside, take cars that maybe aren't good or tracks that maybe aren't your best and get a good point stay out of it, but maybe he needs to get a little more on the other side, a couple wins here and there to beat a Denny Hamlin, to beat a Jimmy Johnson or a Kyle Busch or some of those guys. Yeah, I mean, he needs to be a little more steady. I mean, he's consistent now, but what he needs to do is take that consistency and move it up just a notch, and I think that's going to put him on the level that he needs to be. As far as Richard Childress Racing as a whole, how do you feel about their chances to repeat this year what they did last year? And obviously Kevin would be a big part of that. Well, I mean, it was amazing what they were able to do last year. Such a turnaround. It was, and anytime you talk to Richard Childress early in the season, he would always say, it takes a long time to turn a battleship around. Right. You can't just sit on the edge and kick your feet in the water. We're just going to turn it right here. Right. And, throughout the season, you started to see that when those guys started really turning it around. I think they actually did, they made improvements toward the end of 2009, but it really started coming together last year. They put 3 teams in the chase last year. I would be surprised if those 3 teams aren't battling for one of the spots this year. Now, whether or not all 3 make it, I mean, there are a lot of people that think they've stepped up their program, so it's going to be tough for anybody, to get in. But I think they have as good a shot as they did this past year. Now, Kevin Harvck, it's interesting, obviously, as we come up on the 10th anniversary of Dale Earnhardt's death, and Kevin really getting in that ride. Hard to imagine anyone handling that situation any better than what Kevin has handled it. How does that have any impact on what Kevin goes through this year? Well, I don't know how much it'll impact what he goes through this year, other than the initial when he gets media down attention that he's going to get when he gets to Daytona for Speed Weeks. But Richard has talked about how well Kevin has adjusted to that role. He talked about how when Kevin first came over, it was still the GM Goodwrench car, so you still had those ties, but then it moved into the Shell sponsorship, so he got away from it a little bit. This year he'll be in the Budweiser car, so he gets even further away from it. His own teammate Jeff Burton talked about how Kevin has really matured and come into his own, and how much owning his own Nationwide and Truck Series teams have helped him to do that. He said, the guy's still a fiery driver. He still wears his emotions on his sleeves, but he's a lot more mature, and he understands a lot more about the overall picture now. It's funny when you talk about his personality now. He is so fiery, and you think of conflicts he's gotten in with guys. Joey Logano last year comes to mind, and yet he's really good at knocking out these finishes over and over. I mean, like, of not having those bad days. At least last year, he was fantastic at avoiding those bad days. It's kind of a contrast. You think of a guy that's so fiery as maybe going over the edge more often than Kevin does. Yeah, you think about people like Kevin and like Kyle Busch, and it's like when things go wrong, they really lose it, wrong. Right. Yeah, they do. I think that's one of the good things about him that's going to help him, is he's learned to bounce back from those and not let things like that, destroy what could still be a decent run. I went back and was looking at some video 2 years ago, was when he had one of his big falling outs with Richard at Michigan. He was complaining about the car, and the pit stops weren't fast enough for him. Richard finally got on the radio and said, look, just shut up and drive the car. Last year they go back to Michigan. He's already signed a contract extension, and he wins the race. So he's obviously, I mean, he's improving. I think, a lot as a driver, and he's improving as a person.
Wouldn't shock you to see him actually win a championship, given how close he was.
Not at all.
How would you assess his talent level relative to the rest of the field? He's one of the top guys, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, I think guys like Kevin, Jimmy Johnson, Kyle, and Carl are probably the best at just, they can drive a car.
Just flat out wheeling the thing.
Yeah, just flat out wheeling it. Now, they may not know what to tell the crew chief is exactly wrong with it, what improvements they need, but from a talent standpoint, I think those are your top guys.
All right, that's our look at Kevin Harvick. For Rowdy.com, my name is Bass Masters. This is Kenny Bruce from SceneDaily.com, and we'll be back to talk about more guys in a little while.
Rowdy.com. Say it like it is.
Say what like it is?
Rowdy.com.